Hayom, Zayin Tammuz, Taf, Shin, Pei, Ze Hayom, Asa Adonai, Nagila V'nismecha bo. Well, good to see you all. And I thought the stories for today will focus on some interfaith adventures of trying to make the others into brothers. So I'll talk a little bit about religious peace initiatives and something that I've been working on much in the previous years. One of the former rabbis in our yeshiva, Rav Menachem Fruman, one of his great insights about the challenges in the Middle East is that if religion is part of the problem, it will have to be part of the solution. Religion being part of the problem, this everybody will agrees to. But to realize that the second part of that insight, if it's part of the problem, it will have to be part of the solution. So this is part of the struggle for shalom in the Middle East, is to see, let our religiosity, our religious identity, be a way to connect to others and not something to divide us. And it really goes back to a basic question. If people of religion believe that the God I believe in is different than the God that you believe in, then our religious beliefs will separate us. But if we believe that the same God that we love, that we pray to, that we believe listens to our prayers and loves to us, is the same God that the others are praying to, then our religious belief will bring us together, will connect us. Now, on the surface, this should be a simple task, because if we think about in the primary sides of the conflict in Eretz Yisrael, the religions are primarily between those of the Jewish people and that of Islam in this conflict. On the surface, the religion should be bringing us together, because Judaism acknowledges the Islamic belief in the unity of one God, and so much of Islam is, the Quran is paraphrases of the Tanakh, of the Torah, of the Talmud, and for their part, in the Quran, there's great respect for the Jewish people, referred to Ahlu Kitab, the people of the book. In fact, not the famous phrase that the people of the book, most people don't realize that this is actually a phrase from the Quran. But if we look at the realities, this potential that religion should be connecting us and bring us together, it's very much the opposite is the case. So I'd like to explain why that is the case and how to overcome that. And this will bring us to many stories, because I think in people's head, they know the right thing. If you would take a survey of rabbis and a surveys of imams, sheikhs, and we'll ask them, do Jews and Muslims believe in the same God? The answer would overwhelmingly be, of course. The Rambam says that explicitly, and the Quran says that when you approach the people of the book, tell them that the God you believe in is the God we believe in. So the problem is not in the books. It's not in the theology. The problem is how to take the truths that we know in our heads and to bring them down into our hearts. That is the great journey, the journey from the head to the heart, to thoughts that we know, to an existential reality of how we experience life. Do we experience our connection with the others as a connection in a shared love and belief and connection to God? Or is it just some idea that we know somewhere in our head? Now, how do we make this transformation? How can we take ideas that people have in their heads and bring it down to their hearts? In a word, I would say encounter. And that's why I feel encounter is a more powerful concept and word than dialogue. When I hear about interfaith dialogue, I think about ideas and something intellectual and words and thoughts. When I talk about encounter, this is something much more transformative. This is something that can include me from the top of my whole totality. And that's one of the organizations I'm very active in is called the Interfaith Encounter, because it's the encounter that's necessary. And when we encounter each other, and dialogue, I don't see as being transformative. Encounters can be transformative. And I think when people truly encounter each other, three things could happen. When we encounter each other, first of all, it happens something in our heads. We could change what we think and believe about the other. But encounters could be something much deeper. It could go from when we encounter someone else, and we meet their reality, their essence. The ideas that we have in our head, we take them down into our heart. And then a third thing also happens. So we change what we have in our heads. We feel it in our heart, the connection to the other by the encounter. But the third thing that happens is something new is created. And what's created is a relationship is created. One of my favorite books is The Little Prince. And so I've probably quoted this a lot by now. And the most famous line in The Little Prince is, that which is essential is hidden from the eye. And what's referring to is relationships. Two people have a relationship. What's really essential is not him, it's not her, it's that place between them, which is hidden from the eye. What the Talmud would say, that ish v'isha, a man and woman, zachu, if they're privileged, shchina b'neihem, the divine is between them. It's that place of connection, of meeting, of where the relationship that takes place, the endless hours that we've devoted each other. You can see them, but that's what creates the relationship, and that is what's essential. So when I talk about being able to make religion a force for peace, for shalom, it's not about the theology. It's not about the dialogue. It's about the encounter. An encounter with the other through my deepest identities. And certainly for me as a Jew, my deepest identity is my religious identity and my ethnic identity. And from this point to encounter the other, this blesses me with changing my thoughts, opening my heart, and creating something new. And this is wonderful. Something new is created when I'm connected with another person. And this, sometimes cynical people ask me if I think that the fact that I try to meet many people and many non-Jews, many Arabs. Do I think this will bring peace to the Middle East? So my answer usually is, if two people are connected, this already is shalom. This isn't a means to shalom. This is it. This is a reality of shalom. There is a connection between me and another person. If it's a Jew and a Muslim, a Jew and an Arab, if we have a connection between us, an encounter, a relationship, this is shalom. We want to multiply it by millions, but realizing this is not just a means to an end, which is obviously a very long journey. This is the reality itself. Okay, so these are the essence of my belief, and a lot of my work is on what could be referred to as grassroots initiatives. Grassroots believes that for shalom, for peace, we need what's called a bottom-up approach, not a top-down approach. A top-down approach thinks that leaders could bring peace to the people. A bottom-up approach realizes that the leaders will never be better than the people themselves, so we need peace to come from below. Actually, I have a funny story about this. I have an article that was published in Egypt about some of my ideas about a future peace settlement between Jews and Arabs. And the phrase that in English of peace must begin from a bottom-up approach was translated to peace must begin with Al-Qaeda. Now, Al-Qaeda is the name of that infamous terrorist organization, but apparently the word Al-Qaeda in Arabic means from the foundations. So my article is peace must start from the foundations. Peace begins with Al-Qaeda, and maybe this explains some of the troubles I had visiting Egypt, which maybe I'll talk about later. Okay, so these, and of course, all these ideas really connect up to that marvelous quote by the Sufi mystic and poet Rumi, who would say that beyond ideas of right thinking, beyond ideas of wrong thinking, there is a field. There we will meet. Because so many conflicts get stuck into who's right and who's wrong. And from there, nothing will grow. We have to go beyond the question about who is right, who is wrong, and find that meeting place. In fact, one important insight that I've had from my interfaith encounters is that many techniques that I've learned in couple therapy, and I see my dear friend Gershon is with us tonight, who's one of the real greats on couple relationships, and Gila is also with him. Okay, so, hi Gila. Is that so many of the insights about couplehood relationships are also true about relationships between nations and ethnic groups, meaning that that wonderful line of Rumi of going beyond right thinking and wrong thinking, but finding the place we meet. I first learned this in a class about couplehood relationships, because that's so much true. Couples get disconnected about a deep sense of who is right and who is wrong. And one way is to say, let's find that field to be connected, to be together, and this will help us overcome this disconnection created by this disagreement. And so this truth about couple relationships is also deeply true with conflicts between nations and between religions. If we start talking about who is right and who is wrong in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I have my strong opinions about this subject, but I realize this will not allow anything to grow. And we have to go beyond that and find that field in which we can meet. And this brings me to another very deep and powerful thing that I discovered. And this was at a conference that was in. One second, let me close a little bit the microphone. It's quiet here. Okay. I once went. There's a lovely organization called the URI, the United Religions Initiative. It's composed of 900 grassroots organizations with about 1 million members that focus on really using our religious identities as ways to connect us together. And the world is divided into 6 regions, and there's the Middle East, North Africa region. And a few years ago, I was privileged to be one of the representatives of the Jewish people and of Israel. And I had a little bit of trepidation going to this conference because I knew there would be representatives of every country in the Middle East, meaning Lebanese, Syrians, Kuwait, Iraq, Tunisia, Egypt, and there are many countries in the Middle East, all of them Muslim and one Jewish country. And on the plane, I'm taking a plane by Royal Jordanian Airlines, and a bit trying to keep a low profile. And then I take out the magazine that every airline has their own magazine, and I look at what is the magazine of Royal Jordanian Airlines. And to my great surprise, it is the cover of that journal is none other than Gal Gadot, the Israeli woman who played Wonder Woman. So I realized, okay, I'm not the only Israeli on this plane. It's me and Gal Gadot, Wonder Woman, which also shows you how complex the Middle East is, because Lebanon, for example, banned the movie. Just 1 second. Nama? Nama Khuda? Nama? Okay. Sorry about that. We had this great background music from my kids, but we lowered it a little bit. Anyway, so Lebanon banned the woman Wonder Woman because an Israeli was the lead actor, but in Jordan, she's the front page of their journal. So again, a reminder about how the Middle East is less monolithic than we might have thought. Anyway, being as it may, it was really a lovely conference, but one thing that I took from that, in fact, included in the conference, Friday night, they offered to let the Jews, there were 3 Jews in the entire conference, to do a whole Kabbalat Shabbat ceremony with all the participants there. So in fact, I brought a lot of grape juice, so it shouldn't be alcohol for the Muslims. I brought a bunch of challahs to break into little pieces, and there was an Israeli woman who brought many, many candles for the participants to light. So it's one of these things that, based on what people read in the press, you wouldn't imagine that in Amman, Jordan, Kabbalat Shabbat with representatives of every country in the Middle East. In fact, I even have some pictures from that. Let me see if I could try to share some of them with you. Let's see if I... Okay, let's see. So sorry about that. I don't... Don't quite see them now. Okay, some other time I'll have to show you Gal Gadot and Kabbalat Shabbat in Jordan. Okay, so till next time. Sorry about that. Now, but the powerful slogan that I learned at that event managed in 3 words to summarize what would usually take me 100 words to say. And those 3 words were connection before correction. Connection before correction. To realize that if we want to correct things based on whatever our opinion is, first there has to be a connection. People that are connected can somehow arrive at some way to correct or build some sort of a future together. But if you're disconnected, by being disconnected, then there could be a lot of anger, but you're not going to get anywhere. So these are really 2 sayings that have guided me. I think these are true about couplehood relationships, connection before correction, couples that are in crisis. That line about Rumi, of going beyond right thinking, beyond wrong thinking. But this is deeply true also of relations between countries, between different groups. And I find this at the heart of a lot of my interfaith encounters. Now, I'd like to share some stories. So, as I say, the stories are more important than the theology. So let's some stories of encounters that I felt very much helped making that journey from the head to the heart. In Israel, so the first story begins in a Ramadan iftar several years ago. We know that in the month of Ramadan, Muslims fast, and at the end of the day, there's what's called an iftar, in which the meal after the fast. Now, one year, the month of Ramadan was the month of Tammuz, and on the 17th day of Tammuz, it's also a fast day for Am Yisrael, for the Jewish people. So I went to a massive joint break on Shivasar B'Tammuz, the 17th of the month of Tammuz, a joint meal for Muslims who had fast. For them, it would be the iftar, and for Jews that had fasted that day. Hundreds of people arrived in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem, but suddenly we realized there's a problem, because according to Islamic law, once the sun sets, it's already permitted to eat at the end of Ramadan. However, under Jewish law, a fast day is ended only when the stars come out, which is about 18 minutes later. So we're thinking, what's going to be? And a friend of mine, Sheikh Abd Manasra, said, until we're going to eat together, we will wait till the stars come out so that all of us can eat together. So I felt deeply moved. People that are fasting all month will wait and haven't eaten the whole day. They will wait to allow us to eat with them. Okay, now the next day, so this is a story in installments. That was the first day. The next day, I was going to another iftar held by a very prominent Haredi rabbi called Rav Yoel Schwartz. Rav Yoel Schwartz is a Haredim, or what's often referred to as the ultra-Orthodox, and but he is very, but he's very into spreading Torah for all of humanity. And he decided to host an iftar in his home in one of the Haredi, ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods of Jerusalem. So I'm traveling there, and it's a little bit before the end of the day, that's sundown, and suddenly a friend of mine, who is a Muslim sheikh from Ramallah, Abu Khalil, Nasser Abu Khalil Tamimi, he calls me and says, I'm on a street corner in Jerusalem, and I don't really know how to get to this house where the iftar is. Can you help me? Now I look at the clock and I realize that it's close to sundown, and I haven't yet prayed the prayer of Mincha, which you're allowed to pray until sundown. But then I realized that if I start praying, every minute that I am praying Mincha, my friend Nasser Abu Khalil Tamimi, it's another minute for him standing on a hot day on a street corner, lost in Jerusalem. And I think, how could I pray? So I remembered a passage in the Talmud that says that if you're riding on a donkey and it comes time to pray, but you feel that if you get off the donkey, you're not gonna be able to concentrate on your prayer. It's better to keep riding on the donkey and pray, and rather than stop it. So I decided, okay, I can't leave my friend on the street corner. Got into the car, eyes open on the road, and went through the Mincha prayer to bring him on time for the iftar, feeling that, and I felt in some way in the cosmic karma repaying Abid Manasra by his gesture for us. I was able to have a gesture to consider it for this Muslim friend of mine. But at the meeting, it was very very moving, the meeting between the rabbis and the sheikhs. And at one point, one of the translator, a woman called Rachel, broke out crying because she was so moved by the dialogue between the sides. And Rachel is a woman born as a Samaritan in Jordan, although she ultimately fully returned to her Jewish roots, but sees part of her role in life is bringing this connection between Jews and Muslims. And that night I drove her back to the town of Hebron. And she was a little bit embarrassed about the fact that she had broke out crying during the meeting. But then she told me this very moving story. And she says to me, do you remember the letter you wrote? And since there's some sensitive material here, I'm not going to mention the name. The letter I wrote to so-and-so. Now, okay, this is a little bit of a story inside of a story. A while before that, the leader of one of the clans, Arab clans in Hebron, asked me to write a letter to the commander of the Israeli forces in the city of Hebron. And Hebron is known to be one of the most tense and violent spots in Eretz Yisrael, in the Holy Land. So I wrote the letter. The day that he asked me to write the letter was the day that my son was sworn into the Israeli army, and also told that he will be serving in Hebron when he finishes his training. So I write the letter to the commander of the Israeli forces, And I write to him that he should know that, he said, today my son was sworn into the Israeli army, and he will be one of your soldiers. And you should know that every Friday night, since he went into the army, I always give him the bracha, the blessing, that he should come back b'shalom and come back with the shalom. He should come back in peace and come back with the peace. They said, you are responsible for Hebron, that they should be shalom in Hebron for both for the Jews and the non-Jews in Hebron. So you and know that we have friends in Hebron that that with their help we could keep the shalom in Hebron. And then I told about my friend, the head of this clan. Anyway, so Rachel says to me, do you remember the letter that you wrote to so-and-so? And I say, yes, of course. So she says to me, when the letter arrived, because I sent a copy of the letter to the head of his clan. When the letter arrived, he said to me, I want to understand every word in this letter. So I translated the letter to him. And then she said to me, the way I cried tonight, he cried when I read to him the letter. So if this head of this clan in Hebron, he has his own armed militia. And in that, we see the power of connection, of the human and personal connection. Okay, so this is the first group of my interfaith stories relating to the area I live in. I live near the city of Hebron, which usually makes it to the papers because of clashes between the different sides, but we have all these other dimensions. At a meeting, and one of my great spiritual inspirations is a young Arab woman who I met at the house of this head of the clan. At one meeting, there was a young Arab woman who was the translator. And after the meeting, I gave her a ride back to Jerusalem. Now, when she was in the car, I asked her if she is religious. And then she looks at me as somebody who really doesn't understand anything. She points to her head, and her head's not covered. And religious Islamic women, they cover their hair even when they're single. And then she points that she's wearing pants. She isn't even wearing a dress. So obviously, this is a big misunderstanding on my part to imagine that she possibly could be religious. But then she says, well, I'm not religious, but I fast all of Ramadan and I pray 5 times a day. And I say, what? You pray 5 times a day? When's the first prayer? And she says, well, it's about 5:20 in the morning. And I almost crashed after that. He goes, what? You wake up at 5:20 in the morning to pray? She's a student in Hebrew University. She doesn't consider herself to be religious. Nobody's looking at her, but she wakes up early in the morning to pray to God. Since then, I find her to be my great inspiration. When I find it hard to get out of bed in the morning, I say to myself, Asel, that's her name, Asel, she's been awake for an hour already. What am I doing still in bed? And at one point in the summer, I went with all my students and I prayed at sunrise with them. And I said, guys, today's very special. Today is the day that I got up to pray earlier than Asel. And then the students said to me, Rabbi, your story with Asel, that was in the winter. Now it's the summer. Asel woken up and prayed a long time ago. So I find that much more than theology, these connections create a feeling that we are joined and linked in something which is bigger. In fact, Rav Kook says the reason why monotheism is so important, it's not about that God being upset and jealous that you give some attention to some other God. It's for humanity's sake. It's understanding that one God could be a basis ultimately for a connection and unity of humanity. And part of our challenge of the vision of the book of the prophets is to realize that this oneness of humanity will include God is one, but people can have different identities, but religious identities, but still find that oneness that connects us all. Okay, now another one of my, but of course these stories go both ways. I have some stories when I was I went to Egypt because I have a friend, an Egyptian friend, who wrote his doctorate entitled Alu Kitab, of the people of the book. Now, there was he was guided by professors in Al-Azhar, which is the oldest university in the world, even older than Hogsworth for our Harry Potter friends. And there was a famous, or perhaps infamous doctorate, also called Alu Kitab, by Mohammed Tantawi, who was the Grand Mufti of Al-Azhar, and very much he took all the negative statements about Jews in the Quran and later literature and ignored the positive comments and came up with a very negative view of the Jewish people and Judaism. Not surprisingly, he's a position appointed by Nasser. And my friend Omer Salam had an opposite approach, to look at the positive statements about Judaism and the Jewish people as the essential statement of what Islam says about us, and the negatives possibly talking about particular groups or people, but not something fundamental. So when he invited me to come to Egypt and to visit in Al-Azhar, I thought I have to come to strengthen his point, because I realized there's a discussion about the Jewish people and Judaism, about who we are, what are our essence, and the most important ingredient is missing. There aren't any Jewish people, certainly no rabbis, that are in Al-Azhar to be part of this discussion. So I flew to Egypt. Together with me, also joined me a ultra-Orthodox female journalist who's involved also with Interfaith encounters, called Rebecca. And she's a grandmother and she has 11 of her own kids. Anyway, we come to Egypt and she always dresses like the ultra-Orthodox that are very, very covering up almost all of their body. But for Egypt, she added a couple of extra veils. Now I make it to the airport and I see her with this big suitcase. And I guess because of my Western origin, I try to act like a gentleman from time to time. So I go and I try to help her with her suitcase. So I take the suitcase, but she doesn't let me have it. And I'm sure she just doesn't want me to trouble myself, but I try to be a gentleman. So I'm pulling with all my might the suitcase, and she's pulling with all of her might. But then it turns out that I look ahead, and it turns out that Rebecca is about 20 meters ahead of me, and apparently this is a real Muslim woman who doesn't know why this person is stealing her suitcase. Anyway, so that was our entry into Egypt. But in Egypt, I saw Rebecca, when she prays, you feel this moves the heaven and earth. We went together to an ancient synagogue built on the site, which according to Jewish tradition, Miriam placed Moses into the Nile. And at the synagogue, which Rebecca is praying away, and then two young Egyptian women, looking very Western, very modern. They look at her praying, and one of them says, "Please, could you pray for me? My fiance is sick, and I've been looking around for someone to pray for him. And I look at you, and I see you're the person. I want your prayers." Then she told her that she's Jewish, but said, "It doesn't matter. We need prayers. I need prayers. My fiance need prayers." And after that, throughout our adventures throughout Egypt, these two young Egyptian women we traveled all around. We got to Fayum and all around. And these women, they wouldn't let Rebecca out of their sight. So the power of prayer, inspiring prayer, could really connect us from both directions. If I am in Egypt, maybe add some stories of some of the challenges and difficulties of the Jewish people there. There is a beautiful, the main synagogue of Cairo, Cairo is almost all empty. In better times, there are 60 or 70,000 Jews living in Egypt. They'd been there for millennium, but ultimately they were forced out, and now there are only a handful of Jews in Cairo. I was told there were 8 Jews living in Cairo. The youngest, a woman almost 70 years old. We met her at the Grand Synagogue of Egypt, of Cairo, and she told her story. She actually has a Russian name, not because she's Russian, but she's a Jewish Egyptian family. But her father was a communist, and he was so enthralled with communism that he gave Russian names to his children. And she married a Muslim, and they got divorced. And apparently the law in Egypt, if the father is Muslim and the mother not, the father could claim full rights on the children. And she was in terror that one day her ex-husband would show up and take the children. So her father says, "Look, we're communists. We don't believe in God anyway. Why don't you just convert to Islam so you could sleep well at night knowing that the kids will stay with you?" She said, "Even though I'm not religious, I'm not going to give up on my Jewish identity." And she said, till the kids were age 18, every day she lived in terror that one day the children they would take from her. But thank God the kids did stay with her, and that fear was never realized. Another story about the Jewish people, maybe one or two stories, and then and then we'll call it a night, or for the people from abroad, an afternoon, is that I met the head, the dean of Al-Azhar School for the Laws of Religion. And his specialty was studying about the Jewish people, but he had never met a rabbi. And many interesting points came up there. One of them is I challenged what I find to be a very offensive belief of some Muslims that the Torah that the Jewish people have is forged, that they often try to reconcile differences between biblical stories in the Torah and in the Quran by saying that all sorts of mistake, deliberate and not deliberate, enter the Torah, and therefore the Torah that the Jewish people have today is not the original Torah that was given at Har Sinai. So I said, look, I find this to be we know that the Jewish people are so careful with our Torah. If one letter of a Sefer Torah has a mistake in it, the entire Torah scroll is invalidated. So So we have Torah schools that are 2,000 years old. How could anyone say that there are big difference between our Torah and the original Torah? So he says to me, but of course, you know, the Torah is only, what you have is only a translation. I say, what? He says, of course, the Torah was given in Egyptian. I say, what are you talking about? He says, well, look, the Jewish people were in Egypt. Presumably, they spoke Egyptian. So when God spoke to them and gave them the Torah, it must have been Egyptian. So what you have today is some sort of a translation. I said, look, the Jewish people for 2,000 years have not been in the land of Israel. What language are they speaking now? They're speaking Hebrew. For 2,000 years, we were scattered around the world, but we kept our language. The Jewish people speak Hebrew. The fact that we're in Egypt for 200-300 years, this is nothing for us. For we kept our language, we kept our names, we kept our culture. The Jewish people left Egypt and knew how to speak in Hebrew. Okay, so, but maybe to end on one positive note, one of the most challenging parts were our friend Omar took us to visit an Islamic university in Fayum. Now, what Omar didn't tell me is when we met the dean, I wasn't supposed to let him know that we were Jewish. That the dean was very nice to us until he asked me, and what do you do? So I probably say, I'm a rabbi. And apparently that wasn't the right thing to tell him because he called the police and took our passports, and we know we were in massive trouble. And Omar is saying, wait a second, but Jewish people, these are the people of the book. And the dean says, yeah, well, all those sayings are abrogated. And anyway, they started, looked like they're going to start to trump up charges that were spies. And so me and Rebecca, we are praying away, and somehow we got out of it. And we'll keep the story under the wraps. But after we were let go, we got to meet Omar's professor, an old blind professor. And when he heard that we're Jews, he was deeply moved and said to us the following story. And I think with this we could end, because this is a story of connection. He said that one day somebody came to the Khalif and identified himself as his brother. And the Khalif looks to him and says, are you my brother through my mother? Do we have the same mother? Because he does, to his embarrassment, the Khalif doesn't recognize him and says, no, we don't have the same mother. And then he says, well, are you my brother through my father? He says, no, we don't have the same father. And then he says, well, do we have, oh, you must mean we are brothers in Islam. And the person says, no, I'm not a Muslim. And then the Khalif gets angry and says, so why are you saying that you're my brother? And the person says, because we're all children of Adam and Eve. So we are all brothers. And the Khalif is like the king in the Muslim world, says, you are right. And to show that this is true, I will treat you like my brother. In fact, that statement also really appears in the Mishnah. The Mishnah from the 2nd century says, asks, why is it that God created humanity from one person? If God wanted, he could have created us initially as many nations. And the Mishnah says, gives several reasons. One reason, perhaps the most famous, which actually is also quoted in the Quran in the name of, as something said in the book to the Jewish people, that whoever saves one life is as if he saved the world. And whoever destroys a life, it is as if you have destroyed a world. that grounding of the value of human life, saying that the world began with one person. But another answer is, in fact, for there to be shalom, for there to be peace, that no one could say that my father is greater than your father, because we're all children, we're all brothers and sisters of that same initial couple. Okay, so these are some of our stories for tonight of the power of encounters that give forth for stories to connect all of us together. Okay, and I'll end with the last verse of the book of Kohelet, of the end of things is the fear of God and keeping his commandments, which is the essence. Sof davar, hakol nishma, et Elohim ira, ve'et mitzvotav shmor, ki ze kol ha'adam.